Hi there. This video is about sex differentiation. All right, so what we want to look at here, first and foremost, we want to distinguish between sex and gender. All right, so sex refers to more of the biological characteristics that we have. All right, so we look at chromosomes, hormones, actual anatomy, reproductive systems, or anything physical, biological, and that's referring to sex. And gender is more of a social construct. All right, what are the ideas we have around masculinity, femininity, things like that? What are the cultural values and things that we see in society? All right, that's more of the gender part of it. So we want to focus more on this particular section about the physical development and things that are happening. All right, so one of the things that we're going to see is that when we look at biological sex, it's influenced by a number of different factors, including chromosomes, hormones, environmental, epigenetic factors, different things. All right, and I think the thing that we want to take away from this the most is that while every body is different, we actually have a lot of similarities in how that development takes place. All right, so when we look at sex differentiation, this is the developmental process in which the different parts of anatomy related to reproduction develop. All right, and so a key concept within this is bipotential tissues. That's just a really fancy way of saying is that these early tissues we have as embryos, they can develop into either things associated with males or things associated with females, right? The different reproductive structures. If they're just kind of raw materials, they have the blueprints and they can develop into either one, right? So we're seeing a common source and structure for both men and women. They have the same bipotential that we start off with, but then we're going to see those tissues will develop along different pathways according to chromosomes, right? The chromosomes that we inherit. So, for example, when you look at XX chromosomes, those are associated with ovarian development, and when you have XY chromosomes, which are associated with testicular development, right? So those kind of start the basis of the reproductive anatomy and development that we have, and then hormones come in and look at the actual development of the internal and external genitalia, right? So just to kind of have a comparison and summary of this, we look at something like ovaries and testes, right? They originate from the similar and same embryonic tissue, right? And what we're also going to see is that when we look at some of the functions and look at some of the structures that we have between men and women, they actually share a lot of similarities, right? And so, for example, both men and women have both testosterone and estrogen, right? So we're going to see both of those be present, right? So the other thing that we want to consider, well, I should say that when we look at the actual anatomy of the reproductive systems, right, and we're going to touch on that a little bit more, but when we look at the actual reproductive systems themselves, that's what we would call primary sex characteristics, right? We also have what are known as secondary sex characteristics, right? And these are going to develop during puberty, right? So puberty is when our bodies are changing and they're maturing and they're reaching this state where reproduction is actually now possible, right? So hormones are definitely increasing during this time, and we start to see the development of secondary sex characteristics. And so some examples of this, these are things that tend to be, again, more associated with men or women, depending on what's going on. So for men, some secondary sex characteristics and patterns we're going to see. Voice starts to get deeper, right? There's development of facial hair. You'll see increased muscle mass and things along those lines. Whereas with females, what you're going to see is the breast development, wider hips, and the beginning of menstruation, right? So that period that's going to come in. Now, when those things happen, we're going to see a lot of individual variation. Some people start early, some people start late, some people are kind of right there in the middle. But what we're going to see is that whenever someone does hit that state of puberty, it's highly individualized for them, but it's then also going to follow a very similar pattern that we'll see kind of across the board, right? Now, where we're going to see some exceptions of this is that we have what are called intersex individuals, right? And this can range anywhere from, some research is saying like 1 in 1,000, more or less, and other ones are saying a little more all-encompassing, and they're going to say, no, it's actually closer to 1 in 100. right? But what we're seeing is that these are individuals who either at birth it's noticeable, it's something that becomes noticeable during puberty, or it might not be noticeable at all. You don't actually see any differences until they try to conceive. But this is where these are individuals who don't fall into just one of those two things, right? We have a binary way of seeing this. This is what men are, this is what women are, and they don't necessarily fall into just one or the other, right? They have characteristics that would be kind of equivalent to both, right? So they're it's a struggle for many because it can lead to some confusion and some stress. But what we want to see is that it's actually pretty common. Again, some studies are saying 1 in 100. Right now, we're going to see these differences in chromosomes, the hormones, anatomy, and even receptor functioning in the brain. Okay, that's when you have characteristics from both. Now, just to kind of another thought to add in with all this, we have a field of what's called epigenetics. Right, so this is how our environment influences our genes. Right, so we're born with these genes that we have inherited, and those genes can either be expressed or unexpressed. And what epigenetics is saying is that there could be certain environmental factors, stress, diet, nutrition, the prenatal environment, so actually what's going on during your time in the womb, all these different factors that can influence the development and then expression of those genes. Right, so physical things happening in the environment are now influencing our biology and our genes. Right? That's the kind of at the crux of epigenetics. Okay? So just kind of two things to leave us with on this. One, just an encouragement. We want to try to approach this topic scientifically and thoughtfully, right? And then just kind of a reflection question for us as we consider all these different things about sex differentiation, where we're seeing the differences between men and women, but also some of the things that are common, some of the similarities in place, especially when we look at bipotential, where it kind of starts with the same tissues. We want to see how might a better understanding of sex differentiation change the way society thinks about sex and gender. Okay. So again, just kind of a reflection question for you to consider.